Well, what they were talking about in that meeting in the building next to me wasn't so much the treaty, the withdrawal agreement, the 585-page document. That's pretty much locked up text. But the political declaration, the document which they're fleshing out, which says, might run to about 14 pages or so, and says where the future relationship will go. Theresa May is hoping that in that document, amongst other things, she can promise some sort of distant goal for her critics in her own party. And one of those things she wants in that agreement is frictionless trade being spelt out. Some people in Europe are pushing back on that and saying, well, hang on, that's one of the perks of membership. You don't get it as you walk out the door. That's one of the things she was arguing about in the room next to me. But there are other problems off stage, as it were. Chancellor Merkel, as you said, is getting impatient. She's not sure there's going to be a document here on Sunday ready for her to sign, and she's not coming here unless there is. Two issues, other issues beyond Britain's demands for the document are holding things up potentially. That's Spain wanting a veto over Gibraltar. Some optimism around here amongst officials that that will eventually be parked and put in a protocol or something. But also the issue of fisheries. EU countries wanting to make sure that there is a big promise, an outline agreement about how they're going to get access to British waters in return for the stuff they feel they're giving Britain in this draft agreement. Here's how Theresa May's day went. This is a meeting Theresa May asked for. She wants to nail down some language in the agreement that all EU leaders are supposed to sign off on in Brussels on Sunday. She also wants to be seen to be doing it. Negotiators worked late into last night on what the political declaration will say about the future relationship with the UK. Theresa May wants to say her way offers a path to frictionless trade. Much of the language is still in dispute, even though this is not a legally binding document. In the Commons, before Theresa May left for Brussels, more evidence of how her own side want more than she's brought home so far.
Will she now, even at this late stage, please think again?
It is not good enough as it stands. The Northern Ireland backstop threatens the integrity of the United Kingdom.
Can the Prime Minister reassure me and seek reassurance in Brussels today that this draft doesn't contain a trap, that if we dare to diverge, we undermine our union?
Jeremy Corbyn mocked the idea an implementation period will be long enough to negotiate a new trading relationship with Europe.
Does the Prime Minister think she's fooling anyone by suggesting there'll be a free trade agreement finalised by December 2020?
He wants to use the implementation period that he would vote against to renegotiate the treaty that delivers the implementation period. And he said another referendum isn't an issue for today, but it could be an issue for tomorrow. He doesn't know how he'd vote, he doesn't know when it would be, he doesn't even know what the question would be. That's not leadership, that's playing party politics. I'm working in the national interest.
After the planned Sunday summit, Theresa May goes halfway around the world again to meet some of those same leaders all over again at the G20 meeting in Argentina. Then she hopes to begin the selling of the deal, visiting all corners of the UK, ahead of 5 days of Commons debate in December and then the vote. If she loses that vote, it could trigger the 48 letters demanding a vote of no confidence in her party leadership. And, simultaneously, Labour could call a vote of no confidence in the government. If she saw off those challenges, she might try to push her deal through again in a Commons vote, the same deal or an altered one. But if she loses that, the second time round, she or a successor could be faced with choosing between no deal, a general election, or a second referendum.
It's her government that's got us into this shambles.
I think this becomes even clearer that the Right Honourable Gentleman doesn't actually know what is in the withdrawal agreement, what is in the protocol and what is in the outline political declaration. We talk about a second referendum. Never mind a second referendum. He hasn't got a first clue.
Well, with the shambles this government's got into, it's a good idea. Other people are not ruling out all options.
Theresa May shook her head. The Cabinet Minister only quit last week felt the need to ask if Britain was definitely leaving the EU next year.
On the 29th of March 2019, come what may. And this morning, her replacement, Cabinet returnee Amber Rudd, suggested no deal might never happen, and a referendum might. Leaving the institutions of the EU is proving a mightier challenge than was billed. In one answer in the Commons, Theresa May openly admitted the UK would have to follow single market rules if it was in the backstop arrangement and didn't want to diverge from Northern Ireland. Chancellor Merkel told the German Parliament today that the Spanish government could still throw the weekend summit plans, with its demand to treat Gibraltar as a separate entity to the UK. France, Holland and Denmark want to nail down the shape of Britain's post-Brexit fisheries policy. The Commission is trying to minimise changes and keep to a deadline, even though everyone in town knows any deal signed off here looks destined for defeat next month in Westminster.
If that Sunday summit happens, signing off on the deal, Theresa May will start an intensive 2-week hard sell of her deal. That'll mean tours of all corners of the United Kingdom, visits to TV studios, speeches. Some EU officials say that, in effect, this trip here was a bit of that sales job itself, a bit of theatre. It wasn't entirely necessary. One thing we do know for sure from the voices in the House of Commons, the sales job required is enormous.
Gary Gibbon in Brussels. Well, now, one country which has been having plenty of problems with the EU is Poland, sanctioned by the European Commission over reforms to the Supreme Court, which were deemed undemocratic. Our Europe editor Matt Fry is in Warsaw, where he's talking to the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. Matt.
John, well, welcome to a very chilly Warsaw, very chilly indeed. Poland has a particular interest in Brexit, of course. There are roughly 1 million Polish citizens living and working in the UK, the largest minority in the country. Making sure that their rights are guaranteed is one of the priorities of Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. But his relationship with the EU is also a complex and, as you said, at times rather troubled one. His ruling Law and Justice Party has fallen foul of the European Commission, who accused it of breaching the rule of law and using judicial reform to stifle an independent judiciary. The Poles, rather like the Hungarians, have had Article 7 proceedings initiated against them. They could end up losing their voting rights in the EU. They too are testing the liberal values on which the EU is founded. Now, I met Prime Minister Morawiecki in his Grand Warsaw office today over tea and roses. And I began by asking him whether the EU's member states are as united over the Brexit talks as they once said.
Well, I won't reveal too much of discrepancies, but there are some. There were different opinions, of course. Some wanted to have it more hard, and notwithstanding, all the circumstances and the turbulences around us. But the majority of countries, including Poland in particular, we were steering always towards more compromise-based solution and more flexible solution, right, because this was also very much needed. Because
Michel Barnier has just warned, yesterday that if, for instance, the French government takes too hard a line, this would galvanise the opposition against the deal in the British Parliament and would almost certainly lead to its defeat, which means that we're back to square one.
We are on a thin ice here, and we should not exaggerate either way. And of course, there is a very difficult situation within the United Kingdom, but at the same time, we want the backstop solution be found, and no deal is not a good deal either. So I believe that we are approaching a decisive moment, but a positive moment.
Of course, Poland has skin in the game, as they say, because you've got almost 1 million Polish citizens living in the UK.
I'd like them back here in Poland.
Would you really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Seriously?
We have 3.5% unemployment rate. The second.
You need the labour
lowest.
Coming here.
We need the labour, but we need those citizens who left.
Well, the quickest way of getting them back is if there was no deal, if it didn't pass in Parliament.
No, we wouldn't be in favour of this.
A lot of acrimony, and then suddenly the rights of EU citizens would not be guaranteed in the way that they are in the treaty.
No, actually,
that would be one way of getting your people back.
No. I've actually agreed with my Prime Minister of the UK that on a reciprocal basis we will treat our citizens. Doesn't matter what happens, but I strongly believe that we will find an appropriate compromise in all this.
But what happens as far as you're concerned, if there is no deal, if the deal does not pass Parliament?
So now my base case scenario is a deal. If not, we'll see what kind of flexible, creative solutions we might find, because it's not in the interest of the UK, it's not in the interest of the EU to have a hard Brexit. Can
Theresa May rely on you to try and put pressure on other EU leaders to soften their message before Sunday's summit?
Well, she knows she can rely on Poland. We spoke many times about this. And our ties with the UK, on the political ties, the socio-economic ties are so intense that everybody knows that we have skin in the game, as you said.
And as we now reach negotiations for a future trading arrangement between the UK and the EU, do you expect that those differences between Spain, France, Poland, Germany will become more prevalent? Well, there'll be more division amongst you.
I actually believe that with Germany and Austria, the Netherlands and the Scandinavian countries, we have a majority of stabilizing countries which want to create a space for deal.
But do you think that Brussels is interfering too much into internal Polish affairs? The way that Viktor Orban thinks that they're interfering in Hungarian affairs, and you're both subject to Article 7 proceedings.
Brussels is taking one-sided. It's not impartial anymore. It's not an honest broker, as we call.
That's a serious accusation, isn't it?
Well, the European Commission should be an honest broker, and they even during our conversation, I have named several examples which, on the one hand, were very much praised by Brussels. On the other hand, they are very stubborn in not finding compromises with ourselves. Even these days, we are actually fulfilling all the requirements from so-called interim judgment by the European Court of Justice. Even if we disagree with lots of what they say, we said to ourselves, okay, because we want the stability and we want to preserve the unity, we want to show that we are very much, and by the way, pro-European. And by the way, Poland is one of very few countries within the European Union which is at the same time pro-American and pro-European.
So you're very pro-European.
Yes.
But you also believe that Brussels is interfering too much in your domestic affairs.
Yeah, that's correct.
Can you have it both ways?
Yes.
You can.
Of course, because the pro-European doesn't mean we are endorsing everything what the European institutions in Brussels do, in particular some institutions. But on the other hand, we are realistic and we look in a realistic way at what is happening, and we try to find a deal, a compromise with them.
The country is divided, though, isn't it? It's very divided in terms of, first of all, what Polish politics should be like, to what extent should we reform, to what extent should there be, the rule of law and justice, as it were, and how much room can we give to the opposition?
How can you imagine the people from Western Europe can understand the situation in post-communist system? We here have, for a long time, 25 years after the transformation began, a post-communist system. Of course, people from the Netherlands, with all the respect, they cannot understand the situation. Why I'm saying post-communist? Because in the former German Democratic Republic, they have actually made verification, vetting of all the judiciary and prosecutors. And only 30% post-communist judges stayed in adjudicating. In our situation, 100% of judiciary stayed, and no judge was accused for the appalling cases from the martial law. And I was a freedom fighter in the 80s, and my fellow people were actually put in jail.
You yourself were beaten up, weren't you, when you were 15 years old?
Me myself as well, of course, but this was for a short period of time, several days, and I was beaten and so on. But a lady with whom I worked in underground solidarity movement was sentenced for 10 years. And the judges were actually stayed in adjudicating. This is why we try to bring some justice into the judiciary system as well.
We also talked about a whole range of other issues like Poland's Holocaust law and indeed the question of migration, how few Syrian migrants and refugees have been allowed into this country, and why that is the case. You can watch all that online in the full version of the interview. Now, at the beginning of the whole Brexit process, there was an expectation amongst Brexiteers in London that they could play the EU 27 off against each other. Michel Barnier proved them wrong again and again, and it briefly looked this afternoon as if the divisions were finally appearing, jeopardising the Sunday summit. Alas, there are so many other things that divide the EU, from nationalist populism to migration to what to do about Italy to a common euro budget, that the one thing they still find it easier to agree on is Brexit. How they're bothered by it, how little they want to repeat the experience, and how quickly they want it all over. Back to you, John.
Macfry in Warsaw. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Joe Johnson, who resigned from the government earlier this month over the Brexit deal. I asked him if there was anything the Prime Minister could bring back from Brussels that would change his mind.
No, I'm pleased I resigned a few days ago, because the deal that she's negotiated after 2 years, I gave her space as a member of the government to negotiate the best possible deal for the country. But I'm afraid what she's brought back from Brussels at the end of this process is simply unacceptable.
When you resigned, and you were, after all, Transport Minister, was there any gaming, planning for a no deal? I mean, have they got a massive game plan for that situation?
Well, it's no secret, John, that there is considerable work going into how we're going to deal as a country with the impact of no deal, the reduction in capacity that we'll see in our key cross-channel freight routes, for example, from Dover and Folkestone to Calais. That's going to be severely constrained in a no-deal environment, and that's why the government is putting in place these extraordinary measures to secure parking space for heavy goods vehicles on some of our key roads and motorways.
We've been talking to the Polish Prime Minister today, and he's been talking about creative, flexible solutions to help the UK avoid the hardest of Brexits. He sort of envisages the possibility that if it did even get to the no-deal situation, Europe would be pretty keen to try and avoid the worst of it.
Well, of course, no one wants chaos and disruption, but I think it would be wrong for us to spend valuable time, which is very scarce right now, entertaining the possibility of suddenly reopening a 2-year negotiation that's reached its conclusion with the document, the 585-page document that the Prime Minister produced last week. Reopening that is going to be next to impossible, and we shouldn't waste any time thinking that we can bypass the Commission, bypass Michel Barnier, and try and pick off member states of the European Union one by one. That's a fantasy.
The more you talk about the danger of a no deal, the more moderate MPs are going to be so afraid that there is going to be a no deal vote that they will rally to a deal, Mrs May's deal, that they don't really believe in, but they'd rather have that than no deal.
Well, John, that's a false choice. I mean, it's obviously hopeless for a government to restrict the choice to those two deeply unsatisfactory outcomes. MPs have an alternative. They need to look their constituents in the eyes and tell them the truth. They will be worse off. Worse off. There will be fewer jobs in some of the least economically advantaged parts of this country if we carry on with this present course of action and approve the Prime Minister's deal.
Has anything happened since you resigned? In other words, in your conversations with other MPs, in your sort of sense of what's going on behind the scenes, that has given you any optimism in any degree?
Yes, I'm pleased by the growing sense across Parliament that this deal does not work. You've seen MP after MP stand up and say they cannot support it. This is not the Brexit that the country was promised during the campaign 2 years ago. It doesn't deliver the possibility of trade deals. It doesn't produce greater sovereignty for our Parliament. In fact, it gives sovereignty away. And it's not going to suddenly turn us into a Singaporean-style tiger economy on the edge of Europe. Far from it. We're going to be bound by rules we no longer have any hand at all in shaping. It is a disaster, and there is a growing recognition of that across Parliament.